All right, so for the we are dividing this into two. So the first part, the learning intention for that is we're going to focus on Acadience data that we look at to inform our instruction, and there's 3 success criteria associated with that. So being able to analyze classroom data really at a higher level, so composite score level, to inform tier 1 instruction or whole class core instruction. Another success criteria is to be able to look at that student data and then decide whether or not students should be put into small groups and what those groups what the instruction of those groups might be. And then that also includes kind of that third bullet point of what areas or what skills do students need additional instruction on. So we're going to first look at the composite score. We're going to start kind of higher level and narrow our focus as we go through this. So starting with composite scores, there are 4 things that a composite score tells us. The first is that it's going to let us know the likelihood of success for students to achieve or meet benchmark and in the future. So you can see the different colors represent the different levels associated with Acadience levels. So you have 90% of students are going to meet that benchmark if they're scoring above benchmark level. And you can see 70% or above up to 90 would be at benchmark, and then the 40 to 60, and then 10 to 20, depending on if they're below or well below in that composite score. And so that gives us an idea of how successful are these students going to be at, in our case today, we're looking at beginning of year. So how likely are they going to be successful at the middle of the year when they take this assessment again? And so that's one of the reasons why we focus on progress monitoring and providing small group instruction, is because we want to raise that likelihood of success for those below and well below students so that they can achieve and meet the benchmark. The second thing that it lets us know about is just what type of support will that student need to be able to achieve the benchmark level or that at benchmark level. And you can see there as we're looking at this, so those who are at or above benchmark, most likely just as you're providing that whole class tier 1 instruction, that may be enough for them to achieve that at benchmark. And then below and well below are going to need some strategic and or intensive supports to help them meet that. It also helps us as we're looking at the below and well below students, which ones we need to put into smaller groups and provide really focused instruction. And as we provide that instruction, we want to know, is this instruction even working? Are these students making the progress we want to see? And so that's why we implement progress monitoring. And more details will be shared about progress monitoring, but that composite score is giving us that level of are they going to need progress monitoring and additional support. And then also system level decisions. If you were attending yesterday, that's where we looked right at the composite levels or composite score and didn't really dig in much below that because we were focused more on the grade level or school level decisions that might be made. We also, as we're looking at the composite score, the at benchmark, let me go back. So at benchmark, you can see students, their likelihood of success is 70%, between 70% and 90% if they're at benchmark, and then above benchmark is 90%. So as we look at students we're really wanting to push students to be able to be above benchmark so that they can have a higher likelihood of success. You can also see based on just what we're displaying here as far as some of the data that you have kindergarten students who are at the end of the year, they were at benchmark, and then just how their scores went from first grade to third grade following those same kindergarten students. You can see it's kind of all over the place. And as those students went from first to third grade, and then you have that set of kindergarten students at the end of the year that achieved above benchmark, and looking at their scores between first grade and third grade. And there's a lot more at benchmark level there. And so we're trying to get students to be above benchmark if possible. Also,
Jared,
just
oh,
yeah,
sorry. Can I
please.
add on
Yeah.
with this? A lot of times we talk about students reading on grade level, and there's been a big push in our state to get all third grade students reading on grade level by 2027. So reading on grade level, and this is a little bit different for math. A lot of times Acadience things correlate to each other, but just specifically for reading, being at benchmark on the Acadience reading assessment is not quite the same thing as reading on grade level. So being at or above benchmark on the Acadience assessment is saying, according to the Acadience assessment, this student is going to meet the next Acadience goals on the next benchmark. Reading on grade level is saying that we are predicting these students are going to be successful with highly complex reading tasks, and that they'll also be proficient on the RISE assessment starting in third grade. And so that does correlate with a blue on the Acadience assessment test, but just know that reading at benchmark on Acadience is not quite the same thing as reading on grade level. Thanks, Jared.
No, great point. All right, there's a question in the chat. What is meant by measured by the pathways of progress? Is this in reference to the pathway the teachers set? So we will talk more about pathways of progress, and that will answer your question more deeply. So Dallas, you think you can remember that so we can go through it? Okay. All right, Jen. So Jen, we will get to that as we go through this. So looking at the composite score, or this model that we're going to use today, and this the table and that format is in your participant notebook. You will look at a group of students within a class, most likely, and you can see those students range between well below all the way up to above benchmark levels. So as I'm looking at the groups of students, I'm going to, we're looking at the percentage. So there are 3 of the red well below students, and then I have their student names. I've put their names. And then you have 3 below benchmark, 5, so the green, 5 who are at benchmark, and then 6 out of the 17, the blue or above benchmark. So looking at what those percentages look like. And then as we talked about, we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We'd like you to not only just stop at oh, there's 3 out of 17 or something like that, but who are those students that are scoring well below or below, and so on. And then if I were to add those up, I have 65% of my students of these 17 who are at or above benchmark, and then 35% who are below or well below. So one of the big questions that I want to ask myself is, does my core instruction need to be adjusted? Do I need to switch something, adjust something? so that as I'm teaching my whole class, more of those students are learning the skills that they need. Another thing, let's see. I think this is shared later on, but I want to just share it now. It makes sense to me. But the other thing that you want to pay attention to is since these assessments are the same, being the same type of questions and measuring the same skills throughout the year, you'll want to also, as a teacher, as a school leader, as a coach, pay attention to what does my scope and sequence look like for my instruction throughout the year. And so if I'm seeing a certain piece of data, um, I'm also seeing it through the lens of, well, maybe I haven't taught that skill specifically to my students yet. I'm planning to do that in January. So I'm going to take this data with a bit of a grain of salt, just knowing that instruction is going to be coming, but I'm not going to get too worked up over what my students are showing. So the score reports we're going to look at, it sounds like no one on here, as far as ADM, is still used by a few districts for math, but the large majority of people are using ALO. So we'll look at the class view. I also wanted to, just for math, call out a couple things. One is there is a document that is an alignment from Acadience Math to the math standards and how those connect. And let me copy the link address and put it in the chat for that document. So that can be helpful, just knowing how those align to the standards. The other thing I want to point out, and I'm using math today, but this would apply to reading as well. Sometimes people talk about students not doing well on a particular measure and that they need to be taught like number identification fluency, or they need to be taught advanced quantity discrimination. And that's not necessarily the skill that they're learning. That's what's being used to measure a skill. So just making sure that when you're looking at the data, that you think more about the skills that need to be taught and students need to be instructed on, rather than let's do a lot of practice or teaching a particular test. And then, oh, here it is. And then also that question of when will these skills be taught? Just recognizing throughout the year, you may be teaching different skills at different times. And so using that as you look at the data. Are there any questions related to composite scores? Or Dallas, if there's anything I've missed that you want to jump in and say, please feel free.
Yeah, I don't have anything additional to add, but if you have any questions, please let us know. Like Jared said, this is just kind of your first step of looking to see where your class is at in terms of how many students are scoring where on the assessment, whether you're looking at reading or math or both.
Excellent. So in your participant notebook, on page 3 for reading, page 4 for math, are the tables that you can use. If I jump over there, there's some information there, and then you just have the composite score analysis. So we'd like to take about 10 minutes to, and you can select math or reading or reading, however you want to do that for the data. You'll want to choose a specific, if you're here as a coach or a school level leader, you'll want to choose a specific class to analyze so that you can narrow the focus into some particular students. So I will start the timer and we'll come back in 10 minutes.
I do have a question. Is there a way to sort the student where I am, what I'm looking at, I have the students listed by name. Can you sort them by color?
Yeah,
It just makes the counting go faster.
yeah. Let me get in. Let me get into this. Uh, Getting into this demo group. So, if you have your list of students, a couple things you want to make sure is in the center section as you're sorting these. Sometimes it defaults to all, and you'll want to select B for beginning of year. Then it gives you more specific, detailed data. You may also need to select the grade level. Then I have a list of students. So these are students who are in first grade or took the first grade tests. And then I can see the information on up at the kind of the top of the columns. You have on the left side is where you can sort based on color. Well, it sorts high or low. And then on the right side, you can also filter based on color. So if I was just looking for red and yellow, or if I was looking for green and blue, I can just check those boxes and then it filters out the other groups. So you can sort or you can filter for any of the measures. Composite score is on the far left, and then it goes to the specific measures. Does that help, Andrea?
Yeah, I'll go practice right now. Thank you.
Yeah, good. All right, we will keep moving. So hopefully you've had some enough time to look at least a little bit, get an idea of looking at the composite score data. So we will reflect on that a little bit as you looked at that data. So that question, do you need to adjust your tier one instruction or do you need to provide some additional scaffold for students? And then how are you going to do that? And what specific strategies will you use? So this is on page 5 in your participant notebook. Just we'll go with 5 minutes, just thinking about those 3 questions. Um, Kind of a yes, no. Do you need to adjust your tier one instruction? But if it's a yes, then how are you going to do it? What strategies are you going to use? If it's a no, I'm awesome. My data is amazing. Then maybe you think about how you can help your colleague be able to do that. So we'll just go with 5 minutes. And as you're going through this, if you have any questions, please feel free to share those in the chat or come off mute. Okay, with a minute left, just want to check, are people ready to move on, or do we need some more time? You can just let us know.
Think as long as nobody objects, we're probably good to move on, unless I'm saying that and it's causing some panic. Let us know.
Okay. All right, so now we're gonna narrow or look a little bit more focused on measure level data. So why would we want to move to measure level data? Why not just stick with the composite score? Well, there's some things that the composite score doesn't do. So we mentioned those 4 areas that the composite score can tell us, but they're looking at some things that the composite score does not tell us. So let's get those up. So one would be the areas of instructional focus. So the composite score can flag students that we may want to pay more attention to or look into a little bit more of the data. But the measure level is going to help us with areas of instructional focus. The composite score also doesn't tell us what skills we want to progress monitor, which both of those are connected on. Which skills are we instructing students on? Which skills should we monitor their progress? The composite score doesn't tell us that. So looking at the measure level data will be able to help us with the skills that we need to provide more scaffolding, more support, and then measure that progress as we are providing that instruction. So in looking at this data, hopefully you can see that well enough. Looking at that, who needs support? So we look on the left side, just right after the student's name, and that's going to be our composite score. And so we can tell by the composite score if students are well below or below the benchmark, and that's going to be the red or the yellow. And that's going to help us right away know, okay, these students are scoring below the at benchmark. So we're going to pay attention to those students. They're going to need additional support. But we also want to pay attention to, as we move to our right, there are students who may be at benchmark and maybe barely at benchmark, but they, on some of those particular measures that we tested them on, they are below or well below. So you can see, as far as the students up here, we look at composite score, okay, we know they're going to need some support. But as I look at the measure level, I can see that some of the students, even though they're below or well below, seem to be at benchmark with some of the measures. So I'm going to focus on some of the measures that they might need additional support. And then there are some students who were at benchmark, but their individual measures show on a couple of them that they were below benchmark in those measures. And so that's where I'm going to start to think about how I'm going to group students, what students might need additional support, more than just what I'm providing to the whole class. Some other things you're going to want to consider as you're looking at the student data. So we talked about whether you've even taught that at this point in the year. That might be something that, oh, they're scoring this low because I haven't taught this. So once I teach it, we'll pay more attention to that data. You're also going to look at how is the student performing in the classroom? What's their behavior like? Are they showing up to class? And then also looking at kind of another, I guess, look at classroom performance. As you give tests and assessments within class, is this data that you're seeing through Acadience, is that aligning with what you're seeing in the classroom. And if it's not, why is it not? That's what you're going to want to dig in a little bit more to see. Gosh, this student, it's surprising that they scored this way, whether it's higher or lower, because when we're doing tests or when I'm observing them in the class, they seem like they get it. So what was going on? And then also paying attention to students who are right at that benchmark cut point. Like we said earlier, trying to push them and move them to the above benchmark is where we're trying to aim for to really help them solidify the skills. So in looking at measure level, we kind of went through this, but the first thing, again, you're going to look for students, their composite score that are below or well below. That's going to first, okay, that's kind of the easiest or the step one. And then looking at students who are close to that at benchmark cut point, and also students who are, as you look at the measure level, students who are below or well below. Even though they're at benchmark, there's some skills that they seem to be not scoring as high on, and they could use some support with that. And then we have these tables that have the measure level assessment, name, and then just looking at the different students who are well below, or just above that benchmark. At this point, we're not really looking at students who are above or quite high at the benchmark. We're going to focus on those students who may need some additional support. And so a lot of views here. I'm not sure why we have 2 slides, but we got plenty of views. So in the participant notebook, if you're wanting to focus on reading, that's going to be pages 6 through 9. And if you're looking at math, that's pages 11 through 13. And so let me just go there. So as you're going through, you have the measure level. It's broken out by grade level, and then the different measures that are given or probes given within that grade level. So depending on whatever class you're choosing, go to that particular grade level, and then you have the different measure level data that you can add. This is going to be similar where you put the number of students and the percentage of students out of that. So out of this grade 1 class, how many students are there, and then how many students are well below, how many students are below, and then how many students are really close to that benchmark. They scored at benchmark, but they're really close. And that really close is going to just be your professional judgment on who you're paying attention to and how you're focusing on that. And then there is a place for students' names to think about which students those are. And again, as you're seeing this, thinking, that student, that makes sense. Like, that's what I see in the classroom. Or, wow, that's really surprising that student's scored where they're at. Maybe there was something happening in their day that may have caused them to score that way. So just thinking through that. Are there any questions as we analyze the measure level data? Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any questions. There is one thing from the slide, and realizing that you can't access the link at this point anyway. I'm going to put the link in the chat. There is a document. This, I think, well, let me pull it up. It's specific to math, but I thought it was really good at if there are conversations that teachers are having, maybe in a PLC, or even with someone that they're teaming with. These can be helpful questions as they look at the different measured level data that they can ask themselves and kind of prompt that deeper analysis around measured level data. So just provided that resource for you if that's something of use. Okay, we will take 10 minutes, and as always, we're here to answer any questions. Please feel free to reach out as we go through this analysis. Okay. We are going to jump into some tools now. So you have the composite score, and then you have the different measures and their scores or their data. And then there's some other tools that as you dig even further down into student data, you can see what might be happening and how you might approach instruction for those students. So those two are, one is an error analysis and one is a response pattern analysis. So I'm going to let Dallas speak to the reading side of error analysis first.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So on the screen here is just an example of how ALO scores the assessment. So after you give the reading assessment on ALO and then you go back and look at that assessment, here is how it is scored. So green lines mean that it's correct. The student was able to do that task. Red means that it was incorrect. The student was not able to do the task or to do what was asked of them. So you can see just on that first row there for L and F, the student knew C, there's a green check mark above it. For first sound fluency, there's two examples here. The first one is for deck, and the student was able to segment that sound, that first sound on deck by itself, so it has that line. Now on skirt, the student was able to partially segment that first sound. They got the SK sound together, not just the S. So it did put a green line above because they did get that correct, where they didn't add an extra sound or anything like that. They got that part correct. They just didn't get full credit for it. If you look at the row underneath with the incorrect, the student is getting these wrong, so it puts a red above it. And then if the student skips it, then it's just left as blank. So as you're going through and analyzing the scores that your students received, you can see what they actually did in real time on the assessment. Jared, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So here is an example of a student. If we went in and looked at their ORF measure that they took, their oral reading fluency measure, it shows you those check marks above mean that the student read those words correctly. So the student read trees are, and then very doesn't have anything above it. That just signals to us that the student skipped that word. They didn't read it at all. So it's just skipped. And then the X's above are for the incorrect one. So in that first line, the student read different incorrectly. So if we are looking at our student assessments and what they're doing, we can gain a lot of knowledge from this. So just looking through here quickly, the student has some skipped words, very and some. And then the student also has some words that they either didn't pronounce correctly, which would be different, needles. So what are some of the errors that we can infer that the student is making on this assessment? Anyone brave enough to come off of their mic and give us an idea of what they're thinking just looking at this alone? All right, well, I'm really good at wait time, but doing a virtual meeting, sometimes it can be a little hard. I totally understand. But so just my initial reaction looking at this is this student seems to be struggling with multisyllabic words. Different, they didn't have needles, they didn't have on there. So really struggling with some of those multisyllabic. So this is something that I'm going to want to identify within those multisyllabic words, what phonics patterns are the students missing? And then I can really start drilling deep into what they need, what help they need to get. In the chat, we have a question from Andrea of how do you get to this report? We are using Jared's screen here. So Jared, would you mind going to the demo account and just showing how to access those assessments? So just clicking on, you would go into your students, you would click on the individual student that you wanted to look at. And then from there, you are going to click on the top where it says assessments. So then it shows you your assessments. So for your beginning of your benchmark, you can just click onto those pill bars and it will take you to the assessment so you can see it. So phoneme segmentation fluency, you're not going to see anything because that is done all orally. And so there isn't anything for the student to be reading. If this is a kindergarten student, it might be a little bit hard to see. Go ahead and click on nonsense word fluency right above. Yeah. And it shows us that they are not, that we can't see them. It might be
Right.
because we're in the demo account.
Yeah,
But
and they're
yeah, that is where you would go to see it, is you just go to that assessments page and then you can click on any of those assessments. It'll work on your screens, I promise. It just probably isn't working because it's on the demo account. But you just click on, oh, right there. Perfect. So you click onto that assessment and then it has that report for that specific student on that specific assessment. You can see that for any of the benchmarks. You can also see it for any of the progress monitoring. So if you ever want to go back and look at what a student did on a specific assessment, you can always go back and just click on it within that assessments tab, and it will show you this report. Andrea, thank you for that question. So yeah, just looking at the information that you have for the students, seeing what errors they were making and starting to try to figure out what they're struggling with, maybe what are some potential things that we can do to help that student. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. All right. Okay. So the error analysis is for reading. Let's see. Oh. All right. So the one for math is called the response pattern analysis. The idea is it is focused on computation and concepts and applications. So if I give this worksheet to a student, there's multiple questions and multiple skills that are on this one worksheet. There's some addition, there's subtraction, maybe multiplication or division. There's also different levels as far as the number of digits that are in a number that their students are being asked about. So as I look at this form, I can see that the total is 10. So the student scored 10 points on this worksheet. How do I know what the student knows? And how do I provide support to that student? Just by seeing the number 10 up there in the corner. Well, I mean, one thing you could say is, well, just go faster, answer more questions, right? That's not helpful. But that at this point, I don't know the details of what skills the student is showing that they know and what skills they don't know. So that's where the response pattern analysis comes in. So you would take the two worksheets from the student, and then you would analyze their responses and mark if the student got it correct, you would mark or circle the number, and then you would mark an X if they got it incorrect and a blank if there was no response. And the problems are listed on the left, and then the skills that those problems are assessing are listed in the middle. Now, I've included this in the participant notebook. There's some versions of this for computation and concepts and application for each of the grades 1 through 6. There's also a Padlet for Acadience math resources, and I will put the link in the chat. In this Padlet, I have a section related to this that is tools and response pattern analysis. And so if I click on, I'll just go to grade 1. So this is for computation. One thing you'll notice in the Padlet version versus what's in the participant notebook or workbook is we made some changes because there was an LEA that asked if we could add the standards that are aligned to those problems as well. So we made our own version. We also included this for the whole year, so you could have one page for the student for each student for the full year. You have beginning, middle, and end of year. You may also notice that each of the problems assess the same skill throughout the year. So in this case, problems 1 and problems 11 throughout the year for beginning, middle, and end of year always assess this particular skill of adding 0 or 1 to a one-digit number. So if a student gets it right, you would circle it. If they get it wrong, you would mark an X. And then this allows me to then start to see which skills students are showing evidence for as they respond to the worksheets and go through the measure. There are also, similar to what Dallas showed, there is functionality in ALO. Let me just switch to math. I'll go to my student list. So if there is functionality where I can enter student responses in ALO for computation, and then it scores it for me. And not only does it do that, but then it keeps the information there. So if I click on Armando, I go to assessments similar to what I did for reading, and then I go to computation. Then I can see student responses, and I can see whether they're getting partial points, no points, or all of the points, and what questions they're and whether those were correct or incorrect. So I could use either the hard copy of the paper version, or if I've entered it into ALO, I can use the ALO data as well. And these are just examples of what that might look like. So we're gonna skip this activity, but this would be something where you can use these tools. So we've talked about composite score. We've talked about the measure level, and then we've talked about the error and response pattern analysis, that as you're looking at students' responses and their data, you can get a better idea of, okay, how do I want to adjust and work the instruction for this student or particular group of students. So as far as grouping students, we're going to just share some thoughts about that, and I'm going to let Dallas jump in on this slide here.
Perfect, thank you. So when you're thinking about grouping students for reading, you are going to want to follow a cycle that really uses the Acadience reading assessment and diagnostic assessments as your guide. So we have just this cycle over here. So the first step you're going to take is giving that Acadience reading assessment to everyone. This reading screener, it just tells you, it gives you a quick pulse on the class of who needs help and who is on track for reading success. And just like Jared pointed out, we have that composite score, and that gives us just like our first indicator. We can always look into those submeasures to see if students have a higher composite score, if there's an area that they're still struggling with, and giving them that extra help. But like I said, that first just initial, we're going to give everyone the Acadience screener. That gives us a quick pulse on who needs additional help, who doesn't need additional help. So then we would pull our students who are red or yellow. And Jared put this in the chat that this applies to math too. Yes, I did want to point out that The things that I talk about are directly related to Senate Bill 127, some of those rules that we have in place regarding literacy, especially our early literacy. But anything I say is best practices for math too, and it can be applied to math. So please feel free to take this and just apply it to both reading and math. So first step, give that Acadience reading screener. Take a quick pulse on who really, really needs some extra help. Take all of those reds and yellow students first of all, and give them a diagnostic assessment on their particular skills that they are lacking. So for example, if you have a student who has a low accuracy score, that's just a light bulb to me as the teacher that this student is struggling somewhere with their phonics. It doesn't tell me, however, what phonics pattern they're struggling with. It doesn't tell me what phonics patterns they can and can't do. So give that diagnostic assessment to really drill deep into where they're struggling. Maybe they know CVC words, they have that pattern down, but maybe they can't do silent E. And that tells me right away that's what I'm going to intervene on. So I use that diagnostic to get my interventions, start doing my small groups. And then the next step is to progress monitor and make sure that those interventions are working. So just keep that in mind that while you're grouping students for reading, you're really going to want to make sure that you use both of those two assessments, the Acadience reading as a screener, and then a diagnostic assessment, and really find the particular skills that students are missing and then group them according to those skills on the diagnostic assessment. Thanks, Jared.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So we've kind of talked about this, but as you're looking at the data and you sort that data within ALO, there's some questions you can ask yourself. But before I jump to that, there was something that came up in the chat.
Yes. So I'll jump in and answer this one. Erica asked, when you say Acadience screener, is that separate from the diagnostic? Yes, those are two separate things. So the Acadience assessment, the one that beginning of year benchmark that we give to all students for reading, and then we also give to students for math, the Acadience is a screener. So the screener, like I said, it's kind of like a temperature check. It just tells us who needs extra help, who doesn't. I think of it as a house fire sometimes where I'm like, okay, those red students, their house is on fire. We need to help them. The yellow students, they have electrical fuses going off and their house is going to be on fire really soon and we need to help them. Students who have a green composite, those are like an older house. They need to be maintained because we don't want them to get set on fire. So they just need to be maintained. We need to do regular maintenance with them. Our blue students are like a brand new build. They have a warranty. So maybe there might be some areas we need to kind of work on, but they have a warranty. They're good. But that's just your screener. It doesn't tell you specifically what skills students need help in. And that's where your diagnostic comes in. So my example there, if I'm looking and I see students who are red in their accuracy, that's just like a light bulb to me that they're struggling with their phonics, but it doesn't tell me what specifically they need help with. That's where your diagnostic assessment comes into play. And so
Let me
then
ask
you
you a
can,
quick question.
yes,
Sorry,
please. No, you're good.
we're in the same room. We do administer what we call the diagnostic BOY, the benchmark end of year. Sorry, I'm echoing. But so when and I think you called that the screener.
Mhm.
So what then does Acadience itself have an addition? Okay, so then we do what you're saying. We're just using different terminology. I think it's semantics at this point. Okay.
Yeah,
We do
yeah.
dive into those individual markers and see what they're missing within those with our own resources.
Okay, so the state requires that Acadience for reading is given K through third grade. The state doesn't have a required diagnostic list. We do have a list of recommended diagnostic assessments. I'll find that really quick and throw it in the chat. So those are just recommended ones that you can kind of look and compare to see, but it's not a comprehensive list. So there might be one at your school that you're using that's not on that list, and it's totally okay, just as long as you're drilling deep in to find out what those specific skills are that students are missing. Great question. Thank you, Erica.
Okay, so yeah. So as far as grouping students, so you can look at the data that's displayed, and it's showing that all of these students for their composite score scored in the well below category. But the question is, should all of these students be in the same intervention group? Why or why not? And if you want to come off mute and say it, or just put in the chat, these are all well below students. So should they be in the same group? So as you're considering these, I mean, obviously the size of the number of students, right? You're not going to want that many in a small group. It's not really a small group if they're all in the same group. You'll want to also consider what they were scoring in their measured level. So some students are well below in particular measures, and other students, there's a couple of students that are at benchmark, and some are above benchmark in those measures. So they're not going to need that support like some of the others. And then also just, you can see even based on the composite score, there's a score of 8 or 7 versus 100. There's even one for 0. So there's a wide range. So just looking at that, and it kind of goes to what Dallas was saying as far as diagnostic. You're looking at this, it's screened, and it's provided this flag for you to say, oh, there might be something here that we need to address, but it's not telling you exactly what that is particularly. And then also, as you group students, making sure that that group aligns with the instructions so that they're all learning the same thing at that moment. And then as you form groups, there's some resources here that you can see, but really you're going to want to narrow the focus of what skills you're providing in that small group. You're not trying to do everything. If I jump back to that list of students and their data, there are some students that could use everything. They need help in many different areas with those skills. But obviously, it's going to overwhelm you as a teacher trying to provide all of that, as well as the students on what to focus on. So you're going to want to narrow that focus to 1 or 2 skills and really provide instruction around that. And then that's where your progress monitoring comes into play. As you're providing that instruction, you want to know if those skills, if the students are learning those skills, and you can track that. So there's some resources here as far as grouping students into various groups. I want to show you, well, first, a couple things to keep in mind. The most qualified person should be the one working with the students that have the most need. So making sure that happens. If you're able to have support of paraprofessionals and others who come in and support small group learning, make sure that that's organized in a very helpful way. And then also just recognizing special ed students, general ed students, if they're at the same level, they can be grouped and serviced, or service provided by a special ed staff. And then depending on your resources, this especially happens with Acadience math, because reading has a a lot more requirements around it. But if time and personnel and other resources, just do what is required and what's essential as needed. And then if you can reach the higher skilled students, then do that. But if you need to really focus on below and well below to get them to raise their level. I did want to show you, so in ALO, if I go back to, let's go back and I'll go back to my student list. If you're in your student list, there is a 4-square icon to the side. And if I click on that, it's going to give me kind of an initial grouping. It will select 2 particular measures, and then it will show if students are high or at or above benchmark in those 2 measures, they'll be put in a group. If students are high at or above benchmark in one, but below benchmark in another, it will put those into a group, and you can see it flip-flops that into different groups. And then students who are below or well below in both of those measures, it will put into a group. So you can have this initial grouping, and then that gives you a starting point, and then you can look at how to adjust that. But that is a tool provided in ALO for you to use. It's just that 4-square icon to get that initial grouping. Are there any questions up to this point? Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back and do the second part, which will include pathways of progress and progress monitoring. So let's see, we'll see you at 2:35.
Dallas. Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
I have to get off the call in just a second, but I was wondering, we initially asked about the pathways of progress, the state goal, 60% of first through third. It's different than the pathways of progress that teachers set. Can you tell me what that measure is? I remember being in a state meeting earlier, and it's not the pathways of progress. Is it the predetermined pathways of progress that the system automatically gives? Because it's not what our teachers know as pathways of progress.
Yeah, so I know you have to jump off. We are going to cover this a little bit more later, but when teachers go in and set those goals on the utility on ALO, that is just for them to have an idea of what students need to do in order to reach those pathways. When we pull data, we pull all students who make typical and above growth, regardless of what their goal was set. So if a teacher goes in and sets their goal for well above typical growth, that just tells them that in order to get here, they have to do these things.
Okay.
But then if a student makes typical growth rather than well above typical growth, they're not penalized for that. It still will count positively towards that pull of data that we get. Yeah, it's just a tool for teachers to use within the ALO system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's so same system. You're pulling the data that you need to assess if they made that typical or better, but not impacted or influenced by the goals that teachers set for their instruction. Okay.
No, not at all. That's just to help them to see what they have to
Something
do in
different.
order to reach those pathways.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, of course. All right, it is 2:35, so let's jump back into things. As was mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to come off of mute and ask them or throw them in the chat and we will just answer them right away. We really want this to be as beneficial for you as possible, so please let us know what questions you have and what we can do to help. So we're going to jump into the second part of our training today, and that is learning about progress monitoring and pathways of progress. So we are just going to be using the information that we learned today to determine how to set goals for students, explain when and what to progress monitor, and how to use progress monitoring data to determine the effectiveness of interventions. And again, as we're going through this information for the second half, a lot of it I will be directing towards the Acadience reading assessment and literacy. However, everything that I say is best practice for math as well, and so you can apply it to either content area. So let's start with progress monitoring. So progress monitoring is just the practice of assessing students briefly but frequently on skills that they are currently receiving instruction. That is just to help us know that students are making progress towards their goals. It's to help us know that students are making enough progress and making the progress that we want them to make. It's to provide ongoing feedback about the effectiveness of our instruction and to see if there's anything that we need to change to make our instruction more effective for students. And it is also a way to help us make timely decisions about changes to our instruction. So if you're thinking about our Acadience assessment and we give the benchmark beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year, if we wait for each of those benchmark periods to make changes to our instruction, that's a lot of time if what we're doing isn't helping our students. And so using progress monitoring data, we can see quickly if what we're doing isn't working for our students, and we can make those changes then rather than waiting until the next benchmark assessment that we give. So your progress monitoring really should match the interventions that the student is receiving. So like was mentioned earlier, you're going to give that Acadience assessment first. That's your screener. It's kind of like a temperature check. Let's see how all of the students are doing. And then using that information, you can give that diagnostic assessment to find out where students are struggling with specific skills that they need, specific holes that they have in their learning that need to be filled. And then based on that diagnostic assessment is what you start intervening on. And Jared mentioned it earlier, pick the most basic skill. Maybe you pick one or two, but we're going to first start with those and start filling those gaps during intervention time. Then give your progress monitoring to check to make sure that those interventions are working. We want all of this to really just be correlated to one another. So all follows in line, everything is related. We want to make sure that we're progress monitoring on the skills that the students are receiving that instruction, whether it's in tier 1 or tier 2, to make sure that it's working and that we don't need to make any changes to the student's instruction. So we do have Senate Bill 127, which says that our students, and it does specifically apply to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade, but again, best practices is that we would do this for students in upper grades as well, and in math if we have the capability to do so. But that says that we would progress monitor our students on rate, which just means that we use the Acadience frequency guidelines. So here's a chart that just walks through that. So a student with a red composite score should be progress monitored every 1 to 2 weeks. A student with a yellow composite score should be progress monitored every 2 to 4 weeks. A student who is green should be progress monitored every 4 to 6 weeks. Reds and yellows are required. Greens, and I apologize, this says green and it should say blue on the bottom of that chart there. Greens and blues are optional. They're best practice that we progress monitor them. So greens we would progress monitor every 4 to 6 weeks, and then blues would be once between benchmarks. It's just making sure that our blue students are staying blue and they're not slipping behind, and there's not something that we need to change right then and there for those students. And again, use your professional judgment and LEA guidelines. This is a minimum, so you can always progress monitor more if you feel like there's a student who needs additional progress monitoring. There are some LEAs who have some guidelines that increase the number of progress monitoring that is happening. So as long as you're using this for your base and your requirement, you are totally good to go. When you evaluate your progress monitoring, you're going to see a line for students. So I'm just going to show you really quick on how to see that. So if you were to go into a student, and hopefully this student has some progress monitoring, they do. So when you go into the student's overview, you can click on these, which will show you the colors. I like to do that. It just helps me to visualize it a little bit better. But you can see this line. This is their pathway line, and we're comparing their progress monitoring to that aim line that we have set. So the big gray dot is going to be their beginning of year score, and then it goes up to kind of this target with a white. This is their end of year goal. And then it shows you these probes in between those of where the student is performing according to that aim line, if they're above it or below it. So progress monitoring data really should be regularly reviewed by teachers. If we're not going back in and looking at that data, it's almost pointless to us. We want to be using it and making instructional changes. An example of that would be if you go in and look at that data and there's a student who has 3 probes below that aim line, that tells us that they are not on track to reach their end of year goal. If something doesn't change, they're going to continue to be below that aim line and they're not going to reach that goal. So let's change something now. That way we can help the student as soon as possible to get what they do need. So that way we can start pushing them to be above that aim line. Now, if you were to go in and look at your progress monitoring and there were 3 probes above that aim line, then that tells us that the student is on track to reach their goal. And that's awesome. That tells us that whatever we're doing for this student is working and we should continue doing what we're doing for that student. Now, if you have a student like the one in the previous example, where those progress monitoring probes were below the aim line, you're going to want to change something. That could be the dosage, the frequency, the intensity. There are lots of options of things that may be changed to help support this student, and we're just going to want to try whatever we can until we find out what is best for that student. Also, if you notice that a student is below the aim line, make sure that the program that's being used for the intervention is being followed with fidelity. Make sure the student is attending. Make sure that it is focused on the correct literacy skill gap. So that goes back to that diagnostic assessment. Are we really filling in the gaps that they need? And then just make sure that the student behaviors are not interfering with their instruction. This is part of your participant notebook on page 28. It just has these guidelines on there again, so that way you can easily refer back to it if you see students who you need to change some interventions. Here are some ideas on things that you can do to best help them. When you are looking at progress monitoring reports on ALO, there's a few different ways that you can view this. The first one is the student assessment view. So we were kind of talking about that earlier with Andrea's question, but if I go into students' assessments, it will list all of them for me right here. So I have my benchmarks. Looks like this student doesn't have any progress monitoring listed, which is okay. It's like we said, it's a demo account, so sometimes it doesn't have all the features. But if I were to scroll down, it would also have progress monitoring underneath there, and I could look at how the student had performed on their progress monitoring. I can also click into it like Jared showed earlier, and that will show me my progress monitoring as well. So that's one way you can do it, is student by student and looking at their specific assessments. Another way is to go to your progress monitoring status. To do that, you click on the little hamburger next to the caret, and it will bring up a drop-down menu for you. You just click on PM status. Then you're going to see all of these triangles for each student listed out, and the triangles are color-coded and they mean different things. So a green triangle, like this one here, means that the student 1 was progress monitored on rate. So that the frequency rates we talked about, say a yellow student, a student with a yellow composite score, they should be progress monitored every 2 to 4 weeks. So this student has been progress monitored every 2 to 4 weeks. We're following that rate. and they have at least 3 progress monitoring probes. We want to have 3 to create that pattern. If they have the green, so they've been progress monitored on rate, and they have 3 probes, and then they get the green triangle, that means that the last 3 probes were above their aim line. That means we're good. ALO is making a prediction that this student is going to reach their end of year goal. So this student right here, this example that I'm using, first sound fluency, whatever we're doing for this student with first sound fluency, it's working. Keep it up. Now I'm going to skip yellow and come back to it. I'm going to look at red now. So if I have a red triangle right here, it means again that this student is being progress monitored at rate. However, this student's progress monitoring last 3 probes have been below the aim line. So ALO is saying, hey, I'm making a prediction that this student is not going to reach their end of year goal. So something needs to change for this student. If it doesn't change, they're not going to reach their goal. So this middle student here that we're using as an example, whatever we're doing for first sound fluency is working. We are good to go there. Whatever we're doing for phoneme segmenting fluency or PSF is not working. So let's change it to find something that will work. Now I'm going to come back to the yellow. The yellow means that their aim lines are going, their progress monitoring is going up and down, above and below the aim line. So again, it has to be on rate, and it's using the last 3 probes. So 2 were above, 1 was below, vice versa. 1 was above, 2 were below. ALO is saying, I can't make a solid prediction of if this student is going to reach their goal or not. So these are the students that you're going to want to delve in deeper and see what was going on. You're probably going to want to go look at their last progress monitoring and see what was happening within that. Maybe check out their interventions, make sure that it is the right intervention, but you might have to do some extra research into this student of what's going on. And then if you see students with the grayed out triangles like this example here, that could mean that either the student doesn't have enough data, they don't have 3 data points. So for example, this first student, if you are only progress monitoring on phoneme segmenting fluency and you want to fill that gap before you start progress monitoring on nonsense word fluency, totally fine, but they're not going to have any data points there, so it's going to be grayed out. Or the other option is that they are not being progress monitored on rate. So if you have a student who has a red composite score and they are only being progress monitored every 6 weeks, then that's not the rate. They should be progress monitored every 1 to 2 weeks. So there's the 2 things to look at for there. So gray could be okay. It could also be something that you might want to look into a little bit deeper if it's a student who should be being progress monitored on that skill with a higher rate. You can also progress monitor out of grade level. So you can always progress monitor students on materials that are at their grade level or below their grade level. So if you have a student who is really struggling, you can progress monitor on below grade level materials. Here is a chart. It's also on page 29 of your participant notebook. Again, just for easy access to refer back to it. So if a student is not making progress at their grade level probe, then go ahead and go backwards and find out where they are successful. So say you have a 4th grade student who is not performing well on the left-hand side of the chart, you're going to work your way down until they are successful. So maybe on a 2nd grade oral reading fluency passage, they're able to get 90% accuracy with a fluency score of 40 words per minute. So once they're doing well here, once we find out where they're successful, then we are going to progress monitor on that grade level. So 2nd grade level. We are going to continue progress monitoring on that 2nd grade level until they get 3 progress monitoring scores that reach the end of year benchmark goal on the right-hand side. So we work our way down, find where we need to be, and then we'll go over and work our way up. So once a student gets 3 progress monitoring probes on the end of year goal, then we can start working our way up. So then let's go focus on the 3rd grade or reading passages. Once they can meet this goal 3 times, then we can go up to that 4th grade, which is where we really want them to be. So the goal here is to fill those gaps as soon as possible. So as soon as they have 3 probes that are on that end of year benchmark goal, go ahead and move them up to the next grade level and start practicing there. Again, that's in your participant guide, your notebook, so that way you can refer back to it. When we are talking about pathways of progress and progress monitoring, we really want to accelerate the goals of our students who have red and yellow composite scores. So ALO will automatically set goals for students. It automatically accelerates the goals for students who are scoring at a red or a yellow level. It puts them into the midpoint of above typical growth. Any student who has a blue or green composite, it'll put them at the midpoint of typical growth. The reason for this is that if students have a red or yellow composite score and they make typical growth, that's never going to be enough to close that gap. They have to be making above or well above typical growth in order to close the achievement gap and get them closer to their peers where they need to be. So just know that ALO does automatically accelerate that goal for students. You can always go in and adjust and change goals. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But when you go and change those goals, just make sure that you're keeping those guidelines of red and yellow students. Their goal needs to be set at either above typical or well above typical to close that gap. Oops. Okay, and then I am going to let Jared talk about the next two slides as they relate to progress monitoring with math. And then Jared, just let me know when you are ready for me to go to the next slide for you. Oh, you are muted.
Yeah, I'm gonna just make it a little bigger for me. Sad day, getting old. So as far as with math, everything with progress monitoring aligns with what reading does, but it's important to also pay attention to where the student is going and trying to get them to the to that goal at the end. And so really, I mean, this slide is just showing just paying attention to the beginning scores and then where the middle and end of year are. Computations covered here, but really we encounter a lot of questions or wonderings for kindergarten and first grade, because from the beginning of year to the middle of year, the scores can really increase and change because there's a lot of growth, a lot of learning that's happening in kindergarten and first grade. So being aware of those scores at the middle of the year and where you're trying to get students is really important. Next. And then another thing, this goes to what was talked about as far as out of grade level progress monitoring. But for math, this is just an example. If you have a student who's scoring in all red or well below, and you're not quite sure at what point do I jump in and what skill should I provide support with. I mean, the student seems to be needing all of the skills. So with out of grade progress monitoring, what can be done is just going back to the previous grade or previous measures that were administered. So in this case, this is a first grade student. The one measure that this student hasn't had in first grade would be beginning quantity discrimination. So going back to kindergarten level and administering that to see where the student is successful and then building from there. So in this case, it would be going back to some of the kindergarten measures. If you had a student in, say, third grade who had computation or concepts and applications, moving back to second grade and then possibly even first grade would be appropriate to be able to see where they're successful and then building from there. But it would also be important not to stay there very long, but try and move the student back up to the grade level as much or as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. Okay, so progress monitoring there, it goes hand in hand with pathways of progress. But before we kind of switch gears and talk about pathways of progress and how that correlates to progress monitoring, are there any questions up to this point? Okay, just really know that progress monitoring, the goal really is just to make sure that the interventions and the instruction that the student is receiving is working. And if it's not working, let's change it and try something else that's going to work for the students. So I am going to share a video with you. I need to make sure though that I shared my volume. I always forget to do that when I share. So let me just check to make sure I am not seeing the option. Hold on, I will get this figured out. There we go. Okay, I got it. Got it, guys. Don't worry. Okay, I'm going to share this video with you. We're going to watch it. It's about 7 minutes long. So if you have a snack nearby, go ahead and grab that snack, munch on it as you are watching. This video will also be available to you at the end of the slide deck. There's a link posted to it. We'll also share the slide deck with you at the end of today, so you will have the link to this video. Feel free to refer back to it at any point. Feel free to share it with any of your colleagues, but I'm going to go ahead and hit play so we can watch it. If you don't hear the audio, please let me know.
Hey everyone! Today we are going to explore one of the most impactful features within Acadience Learning Online, or ALO, setting effective and ambitious student goals. First, let's address the foundational question. Why is goal setting so important? The entire system is built around the powerful, research-based framework known as Pathways of Progress. Pathways of Progress is far more than just a target number. It's a dynamic tool that allows you to compare a student's rate of growth to that of their academic peers who started at the very same skill level. This provides the critical context needed to truly understand each student's academic journey. Really, it all boils down to this one big idea. We're using data to do more than just measure progress. We're using it to actively improve a student's trajectory and enhance their long-term opportunities for success. It's all about shaping brighter futures. To fully leverage this tool, it's essential to understand the visual language ALO uses, which is based on color. The system utilizes two distinct color-coded frameworks, one for a student's current performance and one for their growth over time. Let's start with the composite score, which indicates a student's current status. Blue or green scores are excellent indicators that a student is at or above the benchmark and on track for success. But yellow and red, those are our signals for additional support. A yellow score suggests the student will likely need strategic support, while a red score indicates that more intensive intervention will likely be necessary. The second color system visualizes growth over time. This is your pathway of progress. Light green represents typical growth, which is often a suitable target. Dark green signifies above typical growth, and blue indicates well above typical growth. Conversely, yellow and red mean a student's growth is falling below what's typical for their peers. Yellow shows below typical, and red shows well below typical growth. With a clear understanding of the color system, we can now discuss what constitutes a well-crafted goal. It's not just a random number. It has to be meaningful, ambitious, and attainable. Think of it this way. A meaningful goal is one that elevates a student to a higher benchmark status. For example, moving from yellow to green. An ambitious goal is one that aims for a faster, above typical rate of growth. And attainable? Well, that just means we know the goal is possible with high-quality, evidence-based instruction. This is where our instructional strategy becomes key, as our approach will differ based on student needs. For students with a green or blue composite score, A goal of typical growth is often sufficient to maintain their strong path. However, for your students with yellow or red composite scores, typical growth is not enough for them to catch up to their peers. For these students, we must set ambitious goals, aiming for above or well above typical growth to help them close the achievement gap. Now, let's get to the practical application and walk through the step-by-step process of setting these goals directly within the ALO platform. First, navigate to your student list and locate the goal column on the right-hand side. Click on the student's goal, and this will open the goal setting utility. On the left, you will see the student's starting performance. And on the right, using the sliders, you will see the student's end-of-year goals. This is your command center. The ALO platform will automatically set a goal that is at the midpoint of typical progress for students with a green or blue composite score, and at the midpoint of above typical progress for students with a yellow or red composite score. But you have full control. To adjust a goal, simply use the sliders for each measure. As you move them, you will see the target scores and the corresponding growth pathway update in real time. Once you have set a pathway that is meaningful, ambitious, and attainable, don't forget to click the Save Changes button. Finally, let's discuss a topic that is critical to understand, particularly in light of recent platform updates: the connection between goals and your official testing windows. This is a really important update. The end of your goal you set is now automatically linked to the final day of the testing window set by your ALO account manager or assessment director. This is a significant change because it ensures the goal date and the pathways of progress calculation are perfectly aligned. For example, if your school's end-of-year testing window closes on May 12th, the goal displayed on the screen is the target score for that specific day, May 12th. That's the score we're aiming for the student to achieve by or before that exact date. But here's the key question. What happens if you assess a student after that date, say on May 20th? Well, the ALO system is really smart. It knows that the student has had more instructional time, so the goal actually increases to keep up. The goal will automatically move up along the aim line to reflect a new, appropriate target for that later assessment date. To recap these key points on timing, your goal's target date is the last day of your district's or charter's testing window, and if you test a student after that date, their target score will be adjusted higher to account for the extra instruction. Ultimately, setting these goals is not about a system dictating outcomes. It's about empowering you, the educator, to use your professional judgment. You're using this incredible data to guide your instruction and really make a lasting difference for every student. Here's one last question to reflect on. How will you use these ambitious, data-driven goals to shape your instruction and empower each of your students to achieve their full potential?
Okay, so that was just like an overview on setting goals and the pathways within ALO. So one of my favorite things about the ALO platform and the Acadience assessment is that when we are talking about pathways of progress, we are comparing similar students to each other. We're not taking the highest student and the lowest student and comparing them to one another because that's just not fair to the students. We are taking all students who had the same beginning of year score and comparing them to those students to make sure that they are making the same amount of growth as all students who had the same starting line. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about pathways and why the pathways of progress really are such a great tool. So setting goals, it really just creates an aim line for each student that allows you to know if the interventions are working and if progress monitoring is predicting that they're going to make those goals. So the question was asked earlier in our training of the data that we pull at the end of year and how that relates to the pathways of progress. So when data is pulled, we pull the students who made typical, above typical, or well above typical growth, no matter what their goal was set at. So the goal setting utility within ALO really is a tool for the teachers. We want teachers to be able to have an idea of what students need to do to reach those growth levels. We don't want teachers to be shooting in the dark. And so using the goal setting tool is a way for teachers to go in and see, oh, I was hoping I had an example, but it's a way to go in and see a student if they have a goal set for above typical growth, the things that they have to do in order to reach above typical growth. Now, say I have a student who I know has some really good foundational skills. There's a few gaps that they need to close, but I'm really, really going to push this student. Me as their teacher, I'm going to go in and set their goal as well above typical growth. Like, I really think I can push this student and get them to make well above typical growth. Now, say the end of year comes and they take that EOY assessment and they only reach typical growth. So I set their goal as above, well above typical, and then they reached typical growth. That would count positively towards the data that we pull on our end because that student still reached typical growth. So teachers, when they go in and set these goals, like, I would still encourage you to set them at high levels, to really have those high expectations. You want to keep those three things in mind: the meaningful, ambitious, and attainable. So really have like ambitious goals. Feel free to set it at that higher rate. That way you're shooting higher, you're trying to push students higher, but know that we are looking for students, their actual pathway of if they achieved typical or above. Jen, you said thank you in the chat. Please let me know if that didn't clarify things or if that brought up more questions. I'm happy to answer them. I hope that it did clarify. So when you go in and set these goals, you're going to want to make sure that they are ambitious, attainable, and meaningful. So ambitious, they really should challenge both the educators and the students. It should challenge the students to be pushed to a higher level. And then we want to be challenging our teachers too, to be really improving their instruction. So having those ambitious goals and things that they can do in their classroom, in their instruction to help students reach those ambitious goals. They should be attainable. We want to push students as much as we can, but we still want to make sure that those goals are realistic and that it is something that's possible for the student to achieve. And then we want it to be meaningful. We want it to be something that is going to help these students in the long run. So meaningful for a student who has a blue composite score could be to keep them at a blue composite score. A meaningful goal for a student who is yellow might be to push them into that green composite score, just making it meaningful for them and their future success. When you are setting those growth goals, we talked about this, or we saw a little bit in the video, but as you move these sliders on the bottom, it is going to show you specifically for the measures what would happen. And then on the top, this is what is your composite score and what's going to be happening with the composite. So there's always going to be the little X that is color coded and tells you where your student is starting. Then on this side, it gives me my beginning of year score. So this is what the student got on BOY. If I adjust these sliders here, it tells me that this is what we're shooting for the student to reach on that specific measure. So right here, words correct, they got 39. We are shooting for end of year for them to get 87 words correct at the end of year. That would put them at a green for words correct. And then if my student reaches all of these goals that I have set for them, up here, it shows me that my student would move from a yellow composite at beginning of year to a green composite at end of year, and they would make above typical growth. So you're going to play around with these down here to see what will happen with your composite up here. There's also growth levels for each specific measure, and those correlate to the same. So if I am looking at my words correct and I move this slider to these colors, the light green would be typical growth in just words correct. Dark green would be well above in just words correct. And then blue, sorry, I said would be well above. This would be above. So typical, above, well above, just specifically for that measure. So you can target different measures as well. We've already said that ALO will automatically set those goals. I highly, highly recommend that you always go in and check those goals, check to see what ALO set, and then adjust them according to your students. You know your students best, so adjust those goals according to what is going to be the most meaningful for students. So here is an example of a goal that has been set. So the student is starting red with a red composite score. Here was their beginning of year scores. Some goals have been set for this student. That would put the student at a red still at the end of year, but they would be making well above typical, which if we have a student who starts red, we want them to make well above typical. So let's just kind of analyze this goal. Just throw it in the chat, yes or no. Is this goal, so the student's reaching these on the submeasures, is this ambitious for the student? Just throw it in the chat, yes or no. Okay, we have a lot of people who are very shy, it seems like. So looking at this goal, ambitious. Oh, Andrea said it's hard to see my screen. I'm sorry. It's probably really small. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll just kind of walk through it. Thank you, Andrea, for letting me know. So ambitious, I would say that this is a pretty ambitious goal. So for each of these submeasures, this student I've put in the well above typical, accuracy well above typical, retail above typical, and maze well above typical. So yeah, definitely ambitious. I am trying to push this student a lot. Is it meaningful? So looking if it's meaningful, so it is a well above typical growth goal. So that is definitely meaningful for this student. We're trying to close that achievement gap for our red students. So it's definitely meaningful. That's going to help get this student to where they need to be. And then if I look at attainable, so this student read at beginning of year 8 words. By end of year, my goal is to get them to 80 words. They also had a 15% accuracy at beginning of year, and I want to get them to a 94% accuracy by end of year. And then retail, so this student, the assessment was discontinued. They didn't read enough words. They have to read at least 10 words to retail. So it was discontinued, so they don't have a retail score. I'm going to try to get them at 20 words per minute, words about the passage. And then maze, they gave me a 5. And at end of year, I'm going to try to get them to 14. So looking at if this goal is attainable, if this is something that I really think I can push this student to do. And this is all personal. Do you think that you have the skills and tools available to you to push the student? Looking at the student and the skills that they already do have and that they're doing well, do you think you can get them there? Especially looking at this maze score, they did pretty good on that maze. And so they do have some really good skills already. So what am I going to do to help them? Looking at just, like I said, if these goals are ambitious, meaningful, and attainable for each of your students. When you go in and adjust those goals, like I said, ALO will set the automatic goals. You can see here for this student, it automatically set them at above typical, which is great because they were red. So we want them to be making at least above typical growth. But if I look at the goals here, it set them for below typical on words correct. It set them at typical for accuracy, and it set them at well above typical growth for retail. So maybe these are some sliders that I want to adjust and play with. I can bump up their words correct, and maybe I bump down retail a little bit, still checking over here to make sure that my growth is still typical or well above or well above typical for a red student. So go in and adjust those goals play with them, and see where you can push your students, see maybe areas that you can kind of pull down and give them a different goal while still making it meaningful for the student. Sometimes you are going to have a highly skilled learner. You can have a highly skilled learner for both math and reading that pertains to their pathways of progress. In your participant notebook, pages 30 through 31 lists the highly skilled learner information criteria for both reading and for math. When you have a highly skilled learner, this just means that these are those students who are solidly on track. They are really good to go. We don't have a lot of concerns. We just need to make sure that they're getting really good tier 1 instruction, the things that we're going to do for all of our students, and they're very likely to continue to stay on that track. These students are indicated on ALO with a little asterisk next to their pathway score. So once they get a pathway score, which will be middle of year, it'll show up on ALO. So you won't see it right now, but it'll show up on ALO. It'll have a little asterisk next to him. That means that this is a highly skilled learner. You probably won't have a large percentage of students who have this little asterisk. You might have a few in your class. These students, if they make below or well below typical growth, they are still counted positively as being typical because they are a highly skilled learner. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you start looking at your middle of year data for your students who are highly skilled learners. Okay, progress monitoring, pathways of progress. Any questions about either of those, or any questions in general about any of the information that Jared and I have shared with you? I do want to share in your participant notebook, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there is a last page with resources. It has a link to this slide deck that Jared and I shared today. So if you wanted to go back and look at anything, look at any of the slides that we shared, you have that link right there underneath resources and support. We also have these videos. So the second link here, ALO goal setting and pathways. This is the video that we watched together. So here's the link to that video again, if you wanted to refer back to it, if you wanted to share with anyone. There is a second video that is linked on here. This is kind of a general, what is Acadience reading? It is really targeted to parents. So if you wanted to share it out with the parents of your class, please do so. If you wanted to share it at parent-teacher conferences, those types of things, please feel free to share that video